Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Power of Your Mind podcast. You are listening to episode number 286. And I'm Victoria Gallagher. I'm the Law of Attraction hypnotist, the #1 best-selling author of Practical Law of Attraction, Align Yourself with the Manifesting Conditions and Successfully Attract Your Desires. I'm also the founder of HipTalk.com and HypnoCloud apps and the new Believe app when it decides to be finished, which gives you access to about 1,000 hypnosis recordings right in the palm of your hand. And so be sure to watch for Believe and download HypnoCloud in the meantime. So today I have a very special guest with me, Lynne McTaggart. Lynne McTaggart is one of the central authorities on the new science and consciousness. She is an award-winning author of 7 books, including the worldwide bestsellers, The Field, The Intention Experiment, and The Power of 8. She is also the co-founder of the international magazine, What Doctors Don't Tell You. And you can find out about that at www.wddty.com, and also the Health Expo Get Well, and the architect of the Intention Experiments, which is a web-based global laboratory to test the power of intention to heal the world. She's going to be talking a little bit about that later on in this episode. Lynne is a highly sought after speaker and is consistently listed as one of the world's 100 most spiritually influential people. And she can be found on her website at Lynne, that's Lynne with an Lynne, McTaggart.com. All of this information will be in our show notes. And today, Lynne is going to be sharing some of her insights on manifesting in the field. And I just have a real quick addendum to that story here. Back in the late 80s, or no, back in the early 90s, I lived in Las Vegas. And there was a woman who I went to for some spiritual healing work, and she did body work. And it was just, we had such a connection, but then I completely lost track of her. And you know how, like, you have those people that you connect with, and then it's like, oh, what is this person up to? And so I looked her up. Her name was Lynne McTaggart, of all things. And so that is how I learned about you, because I couldn't find her anywhere. But it does seem interesting that, the two of you both kind of dabble, or she dabbled in the energy work, and, you more than dabble in it. So
That's so funny. I saw that there was something, a kind of requiem for a Lynne McTaggart, and people saying, "Oh, it's so sad she died." And there was another Lynne McTaggart. I don't know if this was her, but I got loads of messages of, "Oh no, Lynn's died," etc. And I said, "No, you know, uh,
oh no.
reports of my death are greatly exaggerated." It was another Lynne McTaggart. I've never heard of another one in my life. So now there are 2 more.
Yeah,
That's really
definitely.
interesting.
I don't think she died. I get a sense that the one I had the relationship with, I think she's still alive, but Lord knows where she is.
So funny. That really interesting. But no, very much alive. And that sadly was not me.
Yeah. Well, bless the soul of the person who did. Meanwhile, I'd love to find out, a little bit about this Lynne McTaggart and, and all the wonderful things that you're doing to, help people, especially when it comes to intention and this field. So I really want to dive a little bit into, your more well-known book, which is The Field. And, and if you could share with our listeners a little bit about what is this field? Like what exactly, how would you describe the field?
Okay, great question. The field is a quantum energy field that unites us like this invisible web. And it's created by the action of subatomic particles. Scientists have known about this for about 100 years or more. They've understood that subatomic particles aren't particles at all in the sense of solid little things like billiard balls, but they're vibrating packets of energy, and they're constantly trading energy back and forth in a dynamic pattern. That energy exchange creates virtual particles that are there for just less than the blink of an eye. But with all of the subatomic energy trades, it's like endless games of tennis, microscopic tennis, let's say. All those little energy exchange, those little tennis games, all create these virtual particles, which don't sound like much in themselves, but when you add up all of the subatomic tennis games going on, it's almost an unfathomable amount of energy out there in empty space. And it has two really important implications. Number one, subatomic particles are also waves, and they have a near infinite capacity to store information. Once they bump into another subatomic particle, they take on that information. So, for instance, if the Library of Congress, which has every book in English in the world, were put on a wave, it would be the size of a sugar cube. That's how energy dense these waves are. So it's almost like a big library in itself of everything that ever was. Also, waves go on essentially to infinity. And what that really means is if we're all part of this quantum energy field, we have the ability to access all kinds of information and also to be connected beyond a certain locality. And we've certainly seen that. We know that happens in the subatomic world with non-locality, but I've seen it in the world at large. I've seen it with my intention experiments, when we essentially create a psychic internet of connection.
I love it. I love it. Um, I think it's really important for people to understand these concepts of, how I mean it really does go to prove the philosophy that Albert Einstein had, that everything is energy. And, and it's like the most important thing, I think, to really get a grasp on when it comes to how things manifest, how the law of attraction works. Before we even dive in further, could you just give us a little bit of your background and let us know, like how did you start on this path to learning about all this information?
Okay, well, I got sort of detoured. I guess I got hijacked into this subject. I started out life as an investigative reporter. I was in my 20s after university. I was one of those people who had hidden tape recorders and went after bad guys. And that was what I wanted to do, put bad guys in jail. My first big story, and in fact, my first book, was on baby selling, on what is called gray market adoption. Lawyers who get involved in private adoption but are essentially trafficking babies. So we're not talking about young women profiting. We're talking about lawyers and their intermediaries making a quick buck on children. So that was my first big book, and that was the kind of work I wanted to do. I segued into health and investigating health, and particularly conventional medicine, when I moved over here to the UK, where I live now. And my husband now is also a journalist, and we started 33 years ago a newsletter called What Doctors Don't Tell You. It's now an international magazine. And in the course of researching what works and what doesn't work in conventional and alternative medicine, because that's what our magazine does, I kept coming across very good studies of spiritual healing. And I kept thinking to myself, wait a minute, if you can have a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the world works. So I wanted to find out more about this. And so I convinced my publishers to allow me to go on a journey to find out. And it was a journey without a compass. I did not know what I was looking for. I thought maybe there'll be human energy fields. But as I started talking to credible scientists working at prestigious universities, working on consciousness research, I started recognizing that each of them had discovered a tiny piece of what compounded into a completely new science, a new view of the world. So I put all of that together and synthesized that, and that became my book, The Field. And the difficulty with that book was scientists don't like to venture beyond their discoveries. They don't like to say, okay, what does this mean? They also talk in math, they talk in code. So I had to decode quantum physics and also put all of their disparate studies and disparate discoveries together. So that became the field, but there was a lot of unfinished business as far as I was concerned, which was all about some of this evidence that thoughts are not just things, but things that affect other things. And so being a skeptical journalist at heart, that is probably what has driven me through all of this. I wanted to find out how far we can take it, because at the time there were a lot of things about the law of attraction and manifestation. And the journo in me was saying, okay, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about very subtle effects, like just shifting a quantum particle? Or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? And also, I was intrigued by the idea of what happens when lots of people are having the same thought at the same time. Does that magnify the effect? So I decided to put together all of the science of intention into my next book, The Intention Experiment, but also to invite my readers around the world, because by then the field was in about 30 languages. And so I had readers around the world, and I also knew a lot of these scientists. So I thought, well, if I put them together and had the scientists set up periodic experiments and then invite my readers around the world to take part in these experiments, all sending the same thought at the same time, I'll have one of the biggest global laboratories in the world. So that's what we've done since 2007. And I've run 41 of these experiments to date. And everything from trying to make seeds grow faster, to purifying water, to lowering violence in war-torn or violent areas, to trying to heal someone of post-traumatic stress disorder. And of the 41, 37 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects.
Wow, it's amazing. I was actually, so today, just for our for our listeners who are listening to this years from now, today is November 30th, 2023. And as a lot of people know, right now, the Palestinians and the Israelis are at war. We're not going to get into the whole politics of it. It's just a fact of the matter is they're at war. And so, there have been a lot of studies done even before I knew of your intention experiment. There's the Mauritia effect where they, got together a group of meditators, and there was a huge impact on world peace at that time. So is your intention experiment, is it similar to that? Have you been using it? I did see a little YouTube video this morning where you were talking about that. So do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Sure. There's a big difference between what the transcendental meditation people do and what I do. I love what they do. And their idea is if a critical mass of meditators are in a particular location, the crime rate will go down. And they've done some very interesting studies showing that I think there was one study of 48 cities showing that. So they have a really interesting body of research, and they do try to do good research on their work. The big difference with mine was instead of just meditating, I have all of our people doing a highly focused, specific intention. They're all holding the same thought at the same time. So it's a directed intention. Also, I've done brainwave studies working with a team of neuroscientists at Life University, one of the largest chiropractic universities in the world. They were interested in Power of Eight groups, my smaller intention groups, and they put a team at my disposal. And we were shocked when we did brainwave studies on them, putting an EEG cap on each member of one of a group of volunteers. So we had 7 groups, and each time we put an EEG cap on one member who was doing sending, and we found that very quickly, parts of the brain involved in separation, like the parietal lobes, they sit right back here, and they help us to navigate through space. They tell us what's me, what's not me. They were turned way down. And so were the parts of the brain involved in worry, doubt, negativity. The right frontal lobes, they were also dialed way down. These brainwave signatures look nothing like those of meditation. The meditation shows an increase in certain brainwaves, the slower brainwaves like alpha and theta. Ours were just turning off. And what we were showing were brainwave signatures almost identical to University of Pennsylvania studies of Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer and Sufi masters during chanting. So our people were experiencing and do experience a state of ecstatic oneness. So it's very different from meditation, but it's, all these different modalities work. They just work in different ways and for different ends. And so that's what's happening with our intention experiments. And by the way, we've done 3 intentions for Israel and Palestine. And they were for a ceasefire and release of hostages. Did we do this? After we did our 3rd one, there was a release of hostages and a ceasefire. Did we do this? Short answer, who knows? There are many, many factors in a war. And we can't necessarily claim, yes, we did it without any doubt. However, I've done 11 peace intention experiments, and every single one has shown measurable responses. So this is starting to get a little interesting. But one of the most extraordinary parts of these experiments, particularly the peace intention experiments, is not just the effect on the target, but the effect on the participants. I survey people, and I have done since 2008, since my first peace intention experiment. I survey people after intention experiments, the participants, and say to them, okay, how was that for you? And I initially got back extraordinary responses. People saying our first peace intention experiment was for Sri Lanka, which was going through a 25-year intractable war. And very interesting things happened during the 8 days of our experiment. We did it for 10 minutes every day. And we found that the government during that week won a number of decisive battles that completely turned around the course of the war. And within a few months, the government had taken back the North, which had been choked off by rebel forces. And with a few months after that, that 25-year war that nobody was winning, that seemed to be going on forever, was finished. Now, it finished in a bloody finish, but it finished. So did we do this? Again, short answer, who knows? But what I started recognizing was, first of all, my people, and there were about 15,000 that participated in this experiment. My participants were writing in things like, I felt like I was part of a higher network. I was feeling goosebumps up and down my body. I was crying uncontrollably. I felt like I was in the tractor beam of Star Trek. And then they started reporting changes in their own lives. Their own lives were becoming more peaceful. About 35% were reporting big improvements in all of their relationships. About 40 to 50% report being more in love with everybody they come in contact with, more able to tolerate people not like them, and about half say they're essentially hugging strangers. We also find about a third have health improvements or complete cures. So this to me was shocking and mystifying. And so it was probably from this that I decided to shrink this whole thing down and say, okay, what would happen if I put people in groups of 8 or so?
Mm-hmm.
As I said one day to my husband and my team, and he's a really good headline writer. He's also a journalist. And he said, I love it, the power of 8. And that's how the name came to be. And so in 2008, a first workshop, I put people into groups of 8 or so, thinking it's going to be a nice, mild, feel-good effect. And that is not what happened. Put people into groups of 8, asked them to send intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. Everybody came back to the workshop the next day, and we said, okay, guys, those who had received intention, let's hear what happened. Again, thinking it's going to feel like a facial, somebody rubbing your back. That's not what happened. We had people say things like this. There was a woman who had been limping badly from bad arthritis, and she walked in normally. She was one of the recipients. There was somebody else who said she suffered from depression, and it felt like it was lifted that day. And somebody else who said, I have IBS, my gut's normal. And somebody else who had cataracts and said, it's about 80% better. And I was stunned by this and a little bit upset because I thought, well, I'm not a healer. This isn't what I do. And this must be a big placebo effect. And I thought, this is going to mess up my important intention experiment work. But I was intrigued enough to keep carrying on in workshops. So I kept doing it and I kept doing it. And finally I decided, okay, and I kept seeing amazing results. I've seen 2 people get up out of their wheelchairs, one who was paralyzed from the neck down with idiopathic paralysis. It would come and go, and it went. And she stood up after 10 minutes. And there was another woman who had multiple sclerosis who pushed away her wheelchair. Other people who have had genetic diseases. One woman was a candidate for a liver replacement. Her liver was full of fibrosis, scarring, and her spleen was enlarged from a genetic liver disease. She didn't have a certain enzyme. And those people usually get liver transplants. 1 10-minute intention with a group, and she felt energy all over her body and said, I don't know what's going on. Goes to her doctor a couple of months later and he says, your liver's normal. Your spleen is normal. And so this has happened. I've seen it over and over and over again. So I started thinking a few years after that, well, what would happen if I put people in groups for a year? Would everything heal in their lives? Because by then I'd seen hundreds and hundreds of these kinds of healings. So I started doing that in 2015. I put people in groups. I taught them a whole bunch of rudimentaries about how to do intention. I like to call it intention boot camp, where I teach what I call 13 keys to intention mastery. And I taught them how to deal with negativity, how to use intention with relationships, and all kinds of things. How to pick up other people's intentions, and also to identify what they're unconsciously beaming out to the world, because we're all leaky buckets. We're all sending out intentions every second. So I put people in groups and I started monitoring them for a whole year. And truly, I found that people were healing all kinds of aspects of their lives. For instance, Mitchell Dean, who is a clinical psychologist and suffered from near suicidal depression for most of his life. That is not a good look for someone who is a clinical psychologist. So he had tried everything, couldn't find out what was wrong with him. So he asked his group to do an intention for him to find out the cause. And lo and behold, he gets the impulse to go to a certain Chinese herbalist who says, I'm going to check out certain systems. I'd like to check your liver filtration systems too. He does. He finds out one of those is not working well. He fixes it with a bunch of herbs and things. And lo and behold, Mitchell's depression stops. He has the odd blue day, but it's just a blue day. It's not those heavy days where he really feels like walking in front of a bus. But in that year, he not only cured his depression, but he also, his practice got better and bigger. His Qigong practice got bigger and better. He overcame writer's block, and he lost 15 pounds and got back to his fighting weight. And even his personal trainer said, what are you doing? You're only exercising once a week. You haven't changed your diet and you've lost 15 pounds. Tell me your secret. So this is what I started noticing. The people who kept meeting week after week after week, those are the people who showed up, and also the people who intended for other people. Their lives began to heal in every regard.
Well, this is fascinating. I am really enjoying this story. It just keeps getting better and better. I keep having questions and then you keep answering them for me, maybe because of my intention. One of the things that kind of occurred to me as you were initially talking about that level of the brain the brain waves and how the separation falls away. So it makes sense to me that as you project the positivity and the peace onto other people, if we're no longer separate, then of course, as we're projecting onto other people, we're projecting onto ourselves at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. We talk about, yes, you're in the field. Look, you're in the field. A lot of people say, well, how do I get into the field? And I say, you don't need to get into anywhere. You are in the field. You are part of the field. You are the field. But we don't experience life that way. We experience life in separation. We
Mhm.
experience us as separate from each other, from the rest of the world, and we feel like lonely little people on a lonely little planet in a lonely little universe. We don't feel connected. But I have discovered that when people get involved in group intention, they do enter essentially a mystical state. And that they experience oneness. And I think oneness is the secret sauce here. There are many things. A lot of people say, well, how come this all works like this in 10 minutes? And I had to ask that question myself. It took me 10 years to get the courage to publish a book about it. I kept studying it. I kept thinking, I need to know more. I need to know more. Why does this work? Why is this happening? Why are people getting out of their wheelchairs? This makes no sense to me. And so I came to the conclusion, and I've written about it in my book, The Power of Eight. It has to do with intention, of course. Thoughts are powerful. Thoughts are things that affect other things, no doubt. The science is clear on it. Group effects have an enormous kind of effect. Groups are, as Emile Durkheim, the famous French psychologist, put it, they create an effervescent effect,
Mm.
collective effervescence. We're all lifted by groups. Altruism plays a huge part here. When people are in Power of Eight groups, 7/8 of the time they're intending for somebody else besides themselves.
Mhm.
And this is something really different than the usual self-help, because self-help is usually, as we say, it's about helping the self. My work is all about other help. And when you start looking at the science of helping other people, of altruism, no matter how small, people who do things for other people live longer, healthier, happier lives. There's no question about it. If you have a condition and you help somebody else in that condition, you're more likely to get better. And there are so many studies showing altruism is the way to lead to a healthy, happy life. I mean, my favorite study had to do with two groups of people. The scientists wanted to find out what immune system markers, what occurs to immune system markers, depending on lifestyle. So the first group were a group of what they called pleasure seekers. These were people with all the money in the world, people who were living the dream, so to speak. They had all the money in the world. They went on all the most beautiful vacation, 5-star vacations. They had everything they wanted, basically, materially. So they thought, oh, these guys are going to be really good. They have the best food, they have the best wine. And they looked at their immune system markers and they were terrible. These were people who were going to soon be dying of heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, all of those degenerative diseases. These guys were going to be dropping like flies. The other group were a bunch of people who made less money, weren't living the dream, they were living a life of service. When they looked at their immune system markers, they were so robust. These people were going to live forever. So altruism isn't just a nice thing to do. It's an essential thing to do. It is the key. It is a bulletproof vest. It's the key to a longer, healthier life. So there's that. And finally, there is oneness. I get reports from Power of 8 groups that people very quickly get into a state of oneness. I only have people hold intentions for 10 minutes. I don't have them do hours or 45 minutes of priming. They don't need to. When you get into a group, within a minute or two, you are transported into essentially a mystical state of oneness. It's a fast track to the miraculous. And as I say, I've seen it now thousands of times with I've started doing a class called the Power of 8 Intention Masterclass in 2015. I started the year-long course, and it entails me teaching live and interactive over 6 weeks with 2-hour sessions weekly and homework and practice. But then I put people into groups, depending on their time zone and their preferred meeting time. And I find the people who meet regularly, the vast majority of them, sometimes close to 100% of those who continue to meet, have major transformations in their lives. I've talked about health, but there's also healing of jobs where people want a new job. I think of Andy Spiros. She wanted a new job. She was going through a divorce, and her group was intending for her. She wasn't getting any leads, and she was a talented marketer, coach. She had so many skills, nothing. So I just said, Andy, get off of yourself. Start intending for someone else in your group with an issue or outside your group. And she started doing that, and within a week or two, she gets a call out of nowhere from somebody offering her her dream job. I've seen that over and over again. People producing books they'd always promised themselves they were going to write. People who were in debt, and the group did an intention for them, and out of the blue comes a check from the bank or a grant from Lloyd's of London that was somebody else, or a rebate from a hotel that was another person. And I've seen people improve their own relationships and have new ones. My favorite is Joy, who wanted a new relationship, asked her group to do an intention for her. And out of the blue, within a week, she gets a call from her boyfriend of 35 years ago. Now, she's in Australia. Her boyfriend's in the UK. He starts calling her. This is during lockdown, too. He starts calling her, and they start getting together and getting to know each other again and sending loving notes. And the upshot is He decides to move to Australia, goes through quarantine, and they're together now. They live together.
How
So
beautiful. How beautiful is that?
I
These are all
know.
so, to me, like just coming from the law of attraction and manifestation standpoint, I mean, this is really, giving a huge eye opening into one of the ways to incorporate into, or one of the best ways to incorporate into your manifesting is to begin to like look outside of yourself, look to how you can improve other people. This actually reminds me, I had a glimpse of like a glimpse of of this idea that came to me. I didn't really act upon it. I wish now that I had, but it reminds me of a challenging experience that I was having, early on with my app development, with the developers who are overseas. And I was saying to myself that, we're all like one, we're all spiritually connected. And I'm saying all these things in my mind, even if I'm not even saying them all out loud, but I'm saying all these frustrating things in my mind. Oh, what, ignorant or whatever, people that I'm dealing with. So I'm just projecting more of the same. And what I could have been doing all along, if I had just followed my guide that instructed me, it's like I should be sending them positive energy. I should be intending for them, to be smart. And and all of the things, but not for selfish reasons, but for in an altruistic way, just because they're human beings, and just because they're human beings that I am connected to on this planet. And so you're kind of confirming for me that, again, like we're not victims here of our circumstances. We can we can take matters into our own hands. We can project positivity onto other people, and as we help other people genuinely, unselfishly, unconditionally, we're we're part of that healing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it becomes really easy to do that in a Power of Eight group because at a certain point you're going to get your turn. But you get to meet with these people over and over again, and they become your intention family.
Mm-hmm.
So they're intending for you, and then you are intending for them. And because you're meeting them every week, you want to find out, so what's happening with your right leg, Meg?
Yeah.
And what's happening with this? Have you got a job yet, Sam? And, how's your mother in law, Dory? And, you keep sort of having this little intention family, and you get closer and closer because you started out as a group of strangers.
Mm-hmm.
And yet these are people who have got your back.
Yeah.
They're intending for your healing in some part of your life, whether it's your health, your relationships, your career or finances, even your life's purpose. And so everybody wants to do it. It puts everybody in an altruistic state. That's the beauty of it.
Um,
And that's why I see you don't have to make a stretch to be altruistic. It just happens.
yeah.
And love just happens. There was a guy in one of my classes, one of the master classes, Jerry. Jerry joins for a year, and it is again in the COVID season, the end of the COVID season. He had such a good time. He joins it again. He takes the same course over again the next year. And I said, "Why, Jerry?" And he said, "Because I wanted more. I wanted
Mm.
another group." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because the best thing of all was the compassion, love, connection that I had. I did better with relationships during COVID than I've ever done in my life." And he said, "I now know what love is. It's come
Mm.
through the
Beautiful.
airwaves, but I now know what love is." And I think that is the key element here. We don't get much of this. We are so isolated. I think it's some horrendous statistic in America one in it's 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 people over 65 see nobody, see absolutely nobody, except people on their TV set.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
that scary statistic, got much worse over COVID, but
mhm.
also it is becoming the way that things are happening. And
Yeah.
so this gives you a chance to connect. And again, the science shows we need to connect more than we need to breathe. Human beings were made for community, connection, belonging. We need to do that. It protects us against all kinds of illness. It keeps us safe. It regulates our bodies and so much more.
So in a way, it's kind of like it's like a mastermind group, but with intention.
I'm sorry, I just don't know what a mastermind group is. But I'm sure it is. There are many people who are doing group things,
Mhm.
and this is the kind of group stuff that evolved from the work that I've been doing, and that's truly what happened. And each time I've figured out something to teach, it's been as the result of testing it. So the 13 keys to intention mastery that I teach are the result of a great deal of study into the science of intention and also the distillation of practices of many intention masters. I've studied Buddhist monks, I've distilled their commonalities into a clear, simple way for people to do this.
Amazing. Well, this has really been fascinating and so interesting and intriguing. And I would love to, you know, um, guide people to find out more about how they can get involved. And because I think the work that you're doing is really changing the world. I mean, it's life changing from the sounds of it. And so I really, really appreciate you sharing these amazing stories and inspiring stories. How do you suggest people get to the next level and start to apply this in their life?
Sure, thank you. First of all, join my website, lynnmctaggart.com, and there are some free gifts that provide you with the rudimentaries of some intention practice and group practice. You can join my intention experiments, and as I mentioned, about a third to a half of the people who do experience major transformations in their own lives by being part of it. We're doing some for Israel and Gaza, and you'll see it right on my website, lynnmctaggart.com. It's right on the front page. You just sign up and join. Intention experiments are always free, always free. You can join my community where you can find Power of Eight groups or possibly join it. And if you'd like to study with me, there are a variety of mechanisms and levels of classes. My upcoming class is the Power of Eight Intention Masterclass, which is the year-long course, my most popular course of the year, and that kicks off on February 17th in 2024. So you can find out more about it by just clicking on the link again on my front page, lynnmctaggart.com.
Perfect. And I mean, the timing could not be better, to join one of these intention experiments that's free. And I highly encourage you guys to go sign up on Lynne McTaggart's website. You can receive the Power of Eight handbook and a special video from Lynn. And thank you so much, Lynn, for all of your years and years of contribution and study and hard work. And I'm sure it's been enjoyable work and fascinating work. And thank you so much for blessing us with your gifts on the Power of Your Mind podcast.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.